entire team is there. That's okay. The entire team is really on call during the entire process, but I felt these guys were the most important at the beginning. What we really kind of hope to do is tell a little bit of the story of who we are, what our combined experiences are, what we see kind of the design considerations of the project, to show you a couple of projects that are very closely aligned to what you're contemplating here, so that you can get a good feel of our experiences, our scope, and kind of who we are. So who is Kroski? We're a local firm. We've been around for we're in our 39th year. 60% of our work is adaptive reuse or historic preservation. So we live working with legacy and historic buildings day in and day out, which I think is very important, obviously, for your project. Our projects do range from residential to municipal to college and university and church work. A lot of our work, because of the adaptive use and historic preservation aspects, we have to really kind of concentrate on accessibility, functionality, energy efficiency, and sustainability are obviously big things that every project needs to respond to. A differentiator for us is that because of the high amount of adaptive reuse and historic preservation work that we do, is that our firm and many individuals in our firm are qualified by the National Park Service as historic architects. Again, that's leading into is that we really know how to deal with these older legacy buildings. So quickly, just want to go through a couple of projects that are similar to some degree. This project is Citizens Block. It's a town-owned property in the Rockville section of Vernon. It's town-owned. It was a mixed-use building, had retail on the first floor, residential on the second and third. It had been vacant for, I want to say, over 10 years. So the town acquired it, and you know, we're turning it into office space, very similar to, I think, what you're contemplating for your building. One of the interesting things about this project is latecomer to the program was the addition of the probate court. So the probate court is on the first floor. The thing that's analogous to this is that the building faces a street, very shallow sidewalk. You know, historically that was the front door, but the major parking for this building is behind. So what's really going to happen is the main entrance of the building is really going to shift to the rear, off of the main addition, or off of the main building. Something else that was very interesting as well is that there was an older section of the building that we took down. Certainly this isn't to the scale of the old high school in the 1928 building, but there are certain aspects to it. You can kind of see in the middle photographs, lower middle is existing conditions. So there was a 2-story addition and a full basement that was taken off of the building. That's what's depicted in the middle photograph. So you can kind of see what the conditions of the original building after demolition occurred. And as part of that project, that we had to do some temporary reinforcing of the exterior wall. So that was, part of our early package work. Lower right-hand corner is construction that's underway, and the rendering is the new addition that's off the back. That's for the entrance, as well as a egress stair and an elevator. So very kind of similar project. Kenyon Falls is a little bit different, building construction, different use as well. But as you can see, it was an old mill building. Lower photographs on the right side show the existing conditions before we got started. Lower right-hand corner, a wood frame building. The cupola was missing. Windows were boarded up. There was an addition onto this building that was taken off. A lot of times you can see the lower right-hand existing conditions. A lot of the buildings that we work on when we arrive on site, that's the existing condition. So we're very fortunate in with the 1928 project in your building, is that it's fully occupied. It's been occupied for a long time, and we don't have to wear hazmat suits when we walk around inside of it. But quickly, this was a complete renovation. This is a multifamily housing. It involved state and federal historic tax credits. That's an important thing that we'll talk a little bit about, but it's a long, arduous 5-step process, and it establishes a level of preservation work that needs to occur when you're working with historic tax credits. Borough School, similar multifamily housing project, a vacant school. No addition to this one, but kind of extensive interior renovations and work on the outside. Again, a historic tax credit project. So it involved great care in window replacement, great care of replicating and repairing and restoring interior finishes. Path Academy, I think this is the final project. Really kind of wanted to show this as well. This is a former YMCA in downtown Willimantic. The before photo is in the middle at the top. You can kind of see the entire exterior had this very contemporary masonry screen wall in front of it. And as part of the project, again, this was a historic tax credit project. All of that was peeled off. And the after project, after photo below, you can see the great care that was taken in the removal, but also the research and work to restore the property back to its original view. So I'm going to turn this over to Jeff to kind of talk a little bit about Downs.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you for having us this afternoon. My name is Jeff Anderson again with Downs Construction Company. I oversee pre-construction for Downs. We're based in New Britain, Connecticut. We've been in Connecticut primarily doing work here since 1934. So Downs has been involved with a long list of historic and locally significant projects here in the state of Connecticut throughout that period of time. Some of which are the same era as the 1928 building. So we know what it takes and what goes into the renovation of structures such as this, and we feel we are strongly positioned to provide accurate cost estimates to the town of Farmington to support this effort in conjunction with Kroski. Next slide. Oh, got it. Next slide is a pre-referendum success for us. Downs Construction has been involved also with multiple successful referendums here in the state of Connecticut and Rhode Island. Recently, we've opened up an office there and are supporting multiple towns and municipalities there in a similar effort like we have here in Connecticut. So a value added as part of Downs Construction's support of the Kroski team is our experience with assisting municipalities with outreach for referendums to the extent possible, of course, within the local laws that may be present here in the town of Farmington. Those types of things would consist of opinion or support on mailing list development, written materials, any public presentations, perhaps also Facebook updates, those town website updates, those types of things. Forensic investigations. Because of the era of this 1928 building, as we move through the design development process, it's going to be significantly important that an undertaking of forensic investigations occur. Downs Construction has been involved and has the capability to perform some of those selective investigations. And we, of course, could support that effort as we move forward through the design development on this particular project. You know, we have outlined some of the things that we probably are going to look at in conjunction with Mark's leadership at Kroski as we go through the renovation process of this building. Structural systems documentation to understand what is the base structure for this building. Typically, buildings of this era are structural cast in place concrete, perimeter load bearing walls, topping slabs over that structural slab. That topping slab in some cases has hazardous materials in it. So we have to be conscious of that as it relates to penetrations, new openings, those types of things. So our expertise and experience in that type of thing will pay dividends for accurate estimates as we move forward. We want to look at the insulation value, our value of the intended program fit out of this building as it relates to existing conditions for the 1928 building. And depending on how far we go with the programmatic development here for this particular building, is looking at the openings, matching of finishes and species, looking at grain types of wood. Are we doing a replacement of the windows to attempt to match the 1928 building? We've done that in similar buildings of this era. So again, our experience in that list of projects that we had on the previous slide shows our experience in understanding of what could, ultimately be the eventual program for the renovation of the 1928 building. So that, coupled with our extensive experience with renovations of buildings of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, again, will ensure the most accurate budget possible for the town as we move forward. Joe?
Everyone, I'd like to thank you as well for allowing us to be here tonight. As Mark mentioned earlier, my name is Joe Salamone from Salamone & Associates, consulting engineering firm from we're in Wallingford, Connecticut. We've been working in Connecticut since the late 80s. I've been involved since the early 90s, and I also would be involved through Mark if we were awarded the project for the entire duration from start to finish. So we'll keep the same team, I guess, involved with the project throughout, which I think is important. Mark, sorry about that. So what we've listed there is some of the services that our firm provides. Critical to this project would be the engineering studies, physical needs assessments, capital needs assessments. Everyone has a little bit of a different name for them, but obviously that would be the first thing we would undertake given this project. And we go through the typical HVAC services we provide: electrical, plumbing, fire protection, and obviously these days more and more green technology, photovoltaics, renewable energy to some degree, and then geothermal is a big part of what we seem to be doing a lot of, obviously, lately. We also do a little bit of specialized vertical transportation, which would be elevators and lightning protection. And then the next slide is basically some of the similar projects we've done: schoolwork and the like, typical vintage buildings, 50s or older, same type of programming, where we take an existing building and we try to fit the new use, as well as some of the schoolwork we've done in the past. We started JFK and Oliver Ellsworth and Windsor were two projects that started similar, and they were taken all the way through fruition. So there are about $2.5 million in mechanical projects standalone that are similar to this. Salisbury Center School is another older building, if you will, not quite as old as this one, probably late 40s, but again, similar, where the entire mechanical system needed to be evaluated, working in conjunction with Jeff, estimator, figuring out the scope of work and then going from there. Housatonic Valley, same kind of thing. Essex Town Hall was an interesting project. That was a historical building. I don't know if it was officially historical, but it was treated as such. We certainly respected it as such, as far as location of mechanical equipment and outdoor equipment and so forth and so on. And then Ram High School is a newer building. It's a large middle school combined high school building, but that just had a lot of different energy aspects to it, solar voltaics and some other green technology. So we listed that. I think that's my last slide.
Great. So now to talk a little bit about your project considerations. We obviously went to the walkthrough. We studied the information both in the RFQ information and as well as the information that was passed along once we were selected for an interview. So what we thought that best way for us to illustrate, I felt, what our process was like, how we think, and also to give a flavor of some of the things that we see as issues that need to be addressed as part of this project, or that we need to catch up on as the project were to move forward. So from a project consideration standpoint, breaking it down in a couple of categories, from a site standpoint, it goes without saying is that, you know, whatever happens at the 1928 building obviously has to coordinate with the new high school. And we'll talk a little bit about that. You know, I'm sure that's at the front of your minds, but certainly that's one of the things that we obviously have to, have to tackle right away. As you see the schematic site layout of the new high school building, the 1928 building is really kind of sitting in a field of grass with lots of development, lots of activity around it, no kind of physical connection to it. So establishing an entry drive to the 1928 building, at the end of Monteith Drive, there's a kind of a nicely developed, circulation path. Seems like the place where you would, plug off to be able to, access whatever complex occurs and whatever development occurs at the 1928 building. Obviously, establishing parking requirements. It's going to be a different for option 1 and option 2. But there are also likely some very similarities there with regard to, sharing or having, separate parking. Option 2, I would imagine there'll be a high intensive use after hours, after school use. So there really could be a fair amount of, shared parking that's in close proximity to the 1928 building. But kind of during the day for the, office activity, the town office activity, more than likely really wants to have its own separate parking so that there's kind of the delineation of users, which kind of leads into the next thought of, maintaining school site security. Certainly, we all are well aware of issues that occur out in the public with regard to schools. So having something on campus in close proximity to the school, like the 1928 building and the addition and potential uses during the day, I think we have to have we can't be blind to the fact of how we maintain school security and how people move throughout the site. Relocation of the tennis courts and ball field is obviously going to be an important discussion. We all, we recognize, and I'm sure you all are living it, is that you've got, pretty tight site with everything that's going on in this area between the library and the town hall and the high school, and then whatever is developed with the 1928 building. So working in conjunction with the high school building committee and their team of consultants is going to be a task that we'll have to be very, very wary of, just to see how that occurs. I think it's important to also, think about from a site standpoint, establishing a front entrance to the 1928 building. Again, reflecting back to the Citizens Block, you look at that building outwardly and you really kind of have an idea of where that main entrance should be. Faces the street, faces the direction everybody historically looks at the building. But the reality is of where people park and how people move in and out of the building is something that really kind of needs to be addressed. And certainly understanding utility coordination with the high school project and anything that needs to occur with the 1928 complex, particularly for option 2, really fully understanding where utilities are and how they're being relocated as part of the high school and how we tap off of that. All important site design considerations, but also very important cost implications. Program. Some of this stuff might seem obvious, but from a programmatic standpoint, at the very beginning of a project, understanding the project goals, objectives, and usages. And I think that comes more into play with option 2 than option 1. We certainly understand that town staff has been developing space needs. Getting involved in a project, we need to look at those space needs, understand them, and then and really formulate those into what we call an architectural program it's building upon the information that staff puts together. And we start to really drill down and understand, numbers, sizes, adjacencies, equipment, all those things that need to occur in each individual space. So collectively, when the building starts to get organized, things are in the right place, utilities are provided so that the building operates properly. Was certainly discussion and about the probate court potentially moving here. Because of our most recent work at Citizens Block with the probate court, and we understand that the Office of Public Works Administrator, their office has very stringent requirements, vault requirements. One is it needs to be ground supported. So elevated vaults are, very much frowned upon. So when we began looking at Citizens Block, there was an initial thought by town staff that the probate court would be on a higher floor. And once we got into the vault requirements, we really found out that it really had to be on the first floor, supported by grade. And there's also an extensive review process. So whatever whatever we design, it needs to be reviewed by the Connecticut Library staff, the Office of Public Works. Records Administrator. They also have a liaison from the State Fire Marshal's office that gets involved in a review. What we found is that there are companies that provide modular vaults. And there's been a couple companies, Firelock is who we're working with in Vernon, has provided a lot of modular record vaults in Connecticut, know the process, know the requirements. So it's a great collaboration there. But there are certain things that we need to understand from your program standpoint, and then couple that with architectural programming to make sure that we comply with those types of requirements that might be outside of your everyday knowledge of where things need to be placed. For option 2, really kind of establishing the community use program requirements. Again, understanding the usages. You look at the floor plan, look at the delineation of for that option of what existing spaces would remain. Certainly, you've got the 2 gymnasium. It's pretty obvious why those are there and what would occur. But I think to also understand there's other 3 assembly type spaces. The one very large auditorium, and then you've got kind of the 2 band, music, choral rooms. What would those spaces be used for? So starting to understand those requirements. But in option 2, also understand, does the layout of the spaces within the 1928 building, do they become different with the use of, or if the 64, 78, and 52 editions remain intact? So does the plan change for town offices between option 1 and option 2? I think that would be something to certainly wrap our hands around and have a discussion. Might seem obvious is that whatever you plan in option 1 for the 1928 building just carries through in option 2. And that might be the ultimate direction. But I think as part of the study, we would want to at least be able to answer the question, did we think about how we used any of those other spaces on the first floor? And does it alter the physical layout of the office spaces? So this, from a design consideration, one of the things that we certainly understand is that the community has an affinity for the 1928 building. You had your ad hoc committee, do a survey, which I think really led to this project. So we understand that the building is really a revered historic building. The other things from a research standpoint, what we've also determined is that the building is not in a historic district, and it's not listed on the state or national register, which is fine. But I think it comes into a play when you start to discuss and establish a restoration preservation strategy. How do we approach the 1928 building? Is it a replacement? Is it restoration? Or are we purely putting on our historic preservation hats. If a building is on the register and you're utilizing state or federal historic tax credits, then there are very stringent requirements that we need to follow. But when you're outside of that realm, there are things that we can obviously do that still maintains the historic details and context of the building, but aren't carried to the 100th degree of pure historic preservation. So establishing that that philosophy, that strategy at the very beginning, I think makes a lot of sense. Again, talking about bringing up again, establishing the front entrance to the building, I think it becomes different, obviously, between the two options. Option one, we need to establish an entrance. Option two, there really already is an entrance that comes off of near the main entrance to the auditorium. You've kind of got that avenue, if you will, that kind of splits the functions, the art functions from the recreation function. So studying interior fit out options, from a control, accessibility, wayfinding standpoint. I mentioned it before, does option two change the layout of the 1928 building from an office standpoint? And then really getting into and dialing down into studying building systems options from the envelope, from doors, windows, and roof to MEP to structure. And finally, wrapping up, considerations certainly from an estimating standpoint. Obviously in today's market, the volatility of it, having a firm like Downs Construction who's living that side of the AEC industry is paramount. I'm sure anybody that you interview today is going to have that connection. Really understanding that volatility, the cost of labor, the cost of materials, the procurement. We were just talking out in the hall before this started that these two guys are working on a project together. That switchgear equipment is 70 weeks out. And how do you plan for that? So these are types of things that when you have a construction partner on early who raises these issues, these are issues that we can tackle very early on design and start to figure out a strategy to how to deal with that. And finally, kind of understanding future construction procurement process. Is this a design bid build or your construction management? I think is helpful from an estimating standpoint, but then really establishing the potential construction start and how we would deal with escalation, knowing how far that would be out, and then how that really coordinates with high school construction. As you know, it's going to be a busy site. You've got, one road up, there's residential neighborhoods that totally surround this site. So how that coordinates, how the two projects occur at the same time, I think will be, something that we'll have to talk about and understand. And that's our presentation.
Thank you. Now we're going to have the board ask you guys a few questions. And I think I'll start it off if you don't mind. You kind of touched on this, but I'm going to read this question anyways. Please describe your understanding of the needs of the town of Farmington and the issues facing the 1928 building. What would you propose as a solutions to address these issues?
Well, I think, obviously there's two very delineated options that have been discussed in all the documentation. So, facing option one is certainly the, first paramount is the handling of the exterior of the building. The existing building is surrounded by existing construction on three sides. So when that part of the building comes down, then we've got, three pieces of the exterior envelope that were interior spaces that are now back to exterior. So we have to be able to handle that. Addressing when we were on our walkthrough, there was an indication that roof replacement and window replacement were things that were anticipated or at least discussed. So talking about surveying, looking at the existing condition, but then developing the strategy, the restoration replacement strategy is important to be able to delineate what it is that we put back. From a functional and operational standpoint, certainly understanding and really delving into the space needs that town staff has put together, really understanding the departments, what's going in there, their requirements, and then starting to see how that fits. And we call that a fit out. How do those spaces fit in? Are we just moving offices in existing classrooms, or is there some reorganization that needs to occur and walls need to come down? So understanding the level and scope of renovation is going to be important as well. I think that all goes through the similar discussion with regard to phase two. Our sense is in phase two that there's probably not a lot that has to occur with either of the gyms. There's going to be some existing classrooms that remain intact. What are the uses of those classrooms? Are they going to be, essentially classroom spaces or meeting spaces? So do we just leave those spaces alone? So really defining level of scope and renovation, I think, is going to be important as it relates to use and as it relates to how we budget and estimate the project.
Excellent. Joe?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for coming today.
Sure.
And you actually covered quite a lot of information in such a short time. So I apologize for making you regurgitate your
No.
information again.
That's fine.
The question is, describe your approach to completing the two conceptual designs of the 1928 building. What is your approach to providing high-level options to the town for future use of both the 1928 as standalone or retaining more of the existing facility?
Sure. I think we, I touched a little bit about it. I think, from an approach standpoint, between the two options, one approach could be is that in option one, we develop from first, second, and third floor, understand how the town offices that need to go into that building, how they operate, how they lay out. And you can essentially use that same footprint for option two, and then just deal holistically with what happens with the remaining part of the high school. I think the two gyms are going to remain relatively intact. I think we'll have discussions about locker rooms. Are they antiquated? How are they going to be used? Do they need to be renovated? Do we care if there are showers there? We tend to find these days that, whether it's kids or whether adults are working out, and nobody showers in facilities. They show up in their gym clothes and they leave and end up going to, Starbucks or grocery shopping or whatever. So there doesn't seem to be the concern about showering. So understanding that part and piece of it, understanding the uses again for those three assembly spaces. They have sloped floors. Some of them have depressions. So what are those uses? How do we utilize them? Certainly, what would we need to do? I think that, as I mentioned it, I think for option two, you would really truly have to explore, are there more office uses that go down to the ground floor, particularly where the band and the choral room are located. Is there a greater usage of the first floor so as, community members maybe interact with the town offices? We're not really worried about them, moving between floors. So kind of working through all of those issues and having a discussion to really get an idea of how we could utilize the space most efficiently and most effectively for town staff and for community members.
Thank you.
Thanks. Chris?
Okay, thank you, Mark, and everyone for coming. You discussed a number of your projects that you had previously worked on, and can you just give me some specific challenges and issues you face on those projects and the change order process, how many change orders you had to go through on some of those, so we have a sense of how you dealt with that?
Yep. Yeah. So in reference to the Citizens Block project, that was we're in phase 4 of that project. So in some regard, though, the town's approach to that specific project helped kind of alleviate some of the things that you're talking about. Our first phase was hazardous material abatement and interior demolition. We had done a conceptual design, so we ultimately knew in that very early stage when we designed and documented it, what the potential layout and outcome would be. So we had a glimpse of that. So we were able to strategically demolish existing partitions and really open up the space. And in that particular project, it really was a gut rehab, and it went all the way down to the inside face of the exterior wall. So it kind of lends a little bit, that's the highest degree of forensic investigation. Everything is gone so that you could see where all the issues were. You could see where water came in. You could see where we could see directly through the exterior of the building, and then had to go back and do some reinforcing, holding the building together. So in that extreme, we were fortunate in the phasing of it, is that the change order process has been very, very low, because we really eliminated the amount of unforeseen conditions. When it comes to change orders, there's kind of three broad categories from an architectural standpoint. Jeff, you might have a couple other categories that maybe have some expletives in it, but we look at it as errors and omissions, things that the design team missed that needs to occur in a project that is now going to cost the owner, the town, more money for some specific reason. If there's really kind of a value added thing, then there's really a bit of a discussion of, well, is that a claim against the architect, or was an oversight, but that's something that can be absorbed in a contingency. There's the unforeseen conditions that because of concealed construction, you just didn't know. You didn't have the opportunity. You couldn't see what was behind that. Now there's a deficiency or something that needs to occur. And thirdly, there's owner-directed change of scope. We know these projects take a long time. Sometimes there are things when a project gets opened up that there's something that we want to take advantage of. There was a big opening through an exterior wall that we didn't think was there, but now it is. And now we can put a much larger courtroom for the probate court, or a conference room, or fill in the blank. And we take advantage of that. We are very fortunate that historically from a change order percentage, we are well below the industry average. We do an awful lot of due diligence on historic buildings. Again, I guess of our 60% of adaptive reuse and historic preservation, I probably want to say about half of that, more times than not, are vacant buildings. So we really have the ability to kind of see the bones before we really get going. But getting into doing some forensic work and understanding existing conditions is really kind of paramount to moving forward.
Thank you.
Jean?
Next. Thank you very much for your time and your presentation. Please describe your firm's workload and the capacity of your firm to take on this project and maintain our timeline for a referendum in the spring of 2023. We've got a quick timeline and a lot of coordination that you've spoken about. That's with the work going on up there.
Our firm is not unlike a lot of firms these days. We're busy and we're understaffed and we're looking for folks. That said, I just came off of vacation. It was good timing for me. I have a number of projects that are just in a study phase. I've got a blip of time on my calendar. I would be primarily involved. I'm principal, but I'm also principal designer within the firm. I would primarily be involved in the pre-referendum piece of the project, hands-on, day in, day out, working on design, attending meetings. So for me, the timing is great. And that may sound like lip service, and it's part of dog and pony interview speak. Part of it is, but the reality is that if you decide today and you called us tomorrow and you wanted to have a meeting on Friday, I could be there, and we could jump into the project. I can't speak for these guys, but I think with enough conceptual design work that would need to occur, understanding the programmatic elements, understanding the goals and objectives, the usage, discussing strategy and on, you know, restoration, historic preservation. There's a lot of things that we can talk about and ferret out and discuss and decide. And while these guys start to clear their decks to create a window for us to be able to get some work done.
I mean, our firm would be able to support that schedule.
Likewise for us.
I was going to follow up with that because you did speak to the pre-referendum work that the use did, sorry.
Yep.
The pre-referendum work that would need to be done with the town.
Yep.
Things like that. So
We're available immediately.
Yeah, I think you historically find in firms like ours is that the principals a lot of times get involved with projects at the very front end. And so, and which means that we really, in some degrees, we have the most flexibility. You know, it's easy when you've achieved our level of success and placement within a firm to be able to have some discussion with our fellow leaders, to be able to, you know, shift people around from a production standpoint. But we're not going to be in production on this project until after referendum, which is more than enough time for us to, you know, clear the decks and you know, line up the project manager and our production staff, as well as the similar staff in all of our consultant group. But you know, we're going to be involved at the very beginning and be hands-on with you.
thank you.
Sure.
Dan?
Thank you very much for your presentation and for taking the time to join those of us who are remote and those of us who are in person. In today's economy, we are experiencing price escalation and supply chain issues, which I'm sure is not news to you. Could you describe your cost estimating process to ensure this project comes in on budget? And how do you reconcile if the cost estimate does not equal the bid amount?
Sure. You want to tackle that to start?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Jeff Anderson again with Downs Construction. So first and foremost is going through the programmatic understanding of the project as outlined by Mark, and being comfortable that what the goals are of the town of Farmington are on that piece of paper, if you will, piece of papers, so that when we begin our estimating process, we're comfortable that we're looking at, you know, what we expect to be able to include with the overall program. So Mark had also mentioned, you know, one of the things that we're dealing with right now, and as per that question, is significant escalation in long lead times in our world right now that are influencing cost as much as escalation, and taking up to 70 weeks as an example given for switchgear. So, you know, one of the things that we do and we've undertaken in the last really 8 to 10 months is biweekly meetings with trade contractors. We are construction managers living this day in and day out. That biweekly meeting gives us, you know, current snapshot information in time on how to manage costs, how to deal with them, and ensure that as we conceptualize budgets, certainly in this case, that we are forecasting correct design and estimating contingencies, owner contingencies, escalation percentages to address all of the impact to the bottom line on projects. You know, reconciliation of estimates, I think, is heavily done related to going into an estimate of having cost management solutions incorporated immediately, but also looking at alternates to ensure that we can manage the true cost of this project down the line, and making sure we're comprehensive in that effort, so that if there are further conditions, you know, a year from now, well beyond any approval of a referendum, we have a way of managing that in the future. So that's how we approach it from a construction management perspective, and how, you know, we would support the estimating effort here for Crosskey in this effort.
This is Mark Hopper from Crosskey. Adding to that, I think, you know, moving from a pre-referendum to a post-referendum, I think you've probably all experienced this, is that, you know, pre-referendum there's a high degree of conservatism that's involved in estimating. So we, walk a line of being, too conservative that it kills the project. We have too much, design contingency, estimating contingency, owner contingency that, that the project doesn't, that the town doesn't have, community taxpayers don't have an appetite for the project, that everybody's behind it, but, we're so nervous that and so conservative that drives the cost of the project up to a point where nobody wants to support it. So that's an important thing that from a issue that we address very early on in a project. For this project, as we've talked about approach, certainly Jeff's group would be, heavily involved with, estimating of option 1, estimating of option 2, so that you can clearly understand what the benefits of each option are, but what the costs as they compare to each other are. Is one, twice as, 2 times the magnitude of the other, and be able to delineate amongst ourselves, but then beyond that to the town, what the pros and cons are, what the benefits are between these 2 options. We have an understanding that, after that initial conceptual design, is that there may be a point with interfacing with the council and the potential of a selection of an option for further refinement. And in that particular case, then we're getting more information into Jeff's hands, and we expected that there would be another round of estimating at the end of schematic design, again, pre-referendum. The point being is that as we move through the process, pre-referendum, the post-referendum, we're providing more detailed information for the estimators. So there's always this updating of a project estimate. So at the end of design development, there would be another estimate. At the, through 50% of contract documents, 75% of contract documents, there's another estimate. So, as the details of the project emerge, there's less need to be conservative from an estimating standpoint, and helps drill down that number, so that I think that's another way how we can match pre-referendum numbers and have these checks and balances as we go through the process, the design development process, the project development process, to ensure that once we get to bidding, that we're right on target. Sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer but I think an important one nonetheless.
Thank you. Jeff?
Good evening. Thank you all for coming too. I'm usually on your side of the table
Hi.
on these things. So I'm going to start with the prepared question. I have a couple really quick questions for you after that. One, the communication aspect of how you communicate with the town, the voters, the town council, everybody while we're going through the process. I think, Jeff, you had mentioned that you're used to doing that, and I wonder if you guys had some examples of some of the things you've done, just keeping the town aware and excited about what we're doing.
You mean as in pre-referendum?
Yes,
Um,
for the referendum, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, as I had said during my part of the presentation, we have individuals within our office that have that experience for the community outreach and updates and those types of things that are important to, garner the interest of the public in this project. I'd like to say we have experts, if you will, on our side of the table that can provide that. We've done that recently in Newington, as an example of trying to get out and get the word out for a project to ensure that when a vote is happening, that everyone knows about it and what the pros and cons are. We have examples on those types of jobs that we certainly can provide you if this team is selected as an example.
We've also, in my experience, is that we've got graphics people in our office as well that, helps from a graphic standpoint, pulling information together for use in, paper publications, for, website blasts, Facebook groups, things along that. So, we can provide the background and graphics for then use and overlaid on, whatever social media or communications outlets that, that the town has to be able to get the word out. And as we're coming out of COVID, being able to have, face-to-face meetings, with community members as well, workshops, information workshops, things along that line. It was interesting. I, did a number of those during COVID, totally streamed, where everyone was remote. And, and I think it worked. But I think we're also enjoying being able to get back face to face.
Yeah, I think that was part of my thought was workshops or
Yep.
something to really engage
Yep.
The community. Real quick, you mentioned the historic credits and that aspect of it. I assume that we could apply to have the building listed. It's stuff that's done.
Yes, it is. done.
And I guess, would it be worth it to sort of study the difference in what you would have to do if it got listed and the costs? And then, or if it didn't, I know it ups the costs of a lot of stuff. The other thing is, because there's a high school attached to it, does that's gotta make it moot? I don't know.
No, well, I think there's a couple of things that would need to occur, is that I don't think the tax credits can be issued to a municipality.
Oh, okay.
But we've had projects where there's been, a development of,
A grant.
there's been a development of of another LLC that's outside, and this is the lawyers get involved there, and somebody figures that piece of it out. But and we've worked on municipal projects where that has occurred. Would it be worth it? I think it would be worth it, because, state and federal grants, both of them combined is 20% and 25% of total value of the renovation, for the renovation work, no new construction, no site work. It does become arduous. It's a 5-step process. And if you add on to the process of getting a building listed, then it, a lot of that comes down to time.
Yeah.
So if you have time, and in some regard, we may, because you got to build the new high school before it's vacated, there's a lot of groundwork that could be done along those lines. Again, getting it registered either at the state or national level, and then going through that process. And then you obviously have to find somebody who buys the tax credits, and Eversource is a huge purchaser.
They bought by all of them?
Yeah, they pretty much buy all of them in the state. Yeah, yeah. But it's almost like school grants, is that you have to fund the project first, go through the process. There's a 5-part process, and the part 5 is the issuing of the actual grants or the tax credits, which comes at the end. So it's very similar to municipal school funding projects, so that you have to fund the entire thing first, and then you get reimbursed upon the sale of the grants. So it's a possibility.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, Jack asked mine. I was asking about the credits. That was an interesting, yes.
So
Yeah, perfect.
it's possible.
All right. Well, thank you for your
Great,
presentation.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good luck with your deliberations.
Thank you.
Thank you. How does it work? We're still, Tim,
Still alive.
yeah, so remind everyone.
Mute us.
Just remember that we're still on the Zoom call.
So next is Q&A, correct?
Next up is QA&M. They're scheduled for 5:40.
40.
So it looks like we're right on schedule. I don't know if anybody needs a bathroom break or something. There we go.
Devin, can you do
let's
something
get-
where you just say a break? We're taking a 5-minute break.
So we'll take a brief 5-minute break and we'll return.
Okay.
Okay, we're back.
I don't think I was. Yeah, no. Yeah.
Oh.
Were you flipping them? I think maybe when you're in the hall, it might have advanced some.
Okay, welcome, everyone. Mr. Quisenberry, you can start. And before you start, hold on. Take two. Kat and Kathy are going to just go over a few things on our process, okay? Thanks.
So thank you so much for coming. For tonight, we've allocated 30 minutes for a presentation. We will be keeping time and I'll try to give you a 2-minute warning, just so you know when we're running out. And if you go over, I'll say, wrap it up, time to keep moving. Then we have questions prepared by the committee. We've allocated about 15 minutes for that. So it'll go about 45 minutes total.
And just so you know, we have 3 firms tonight that we have shortlisted. After we go through, you're the second one tonight. We have one more after that. Then we are going to go, the committee is going to go into executive session. We're going to talk in executive session. Then according to our agenda, we're going to come back in and our goal is to select our final candidate tonight. So just to let you know.
That's sufficient.
Ann, welcome.
Okay. Well, thank you for having us in to speak to you about my favorite building. Basically, I wanted to start off with just introductions. I'm David Quisenberry, founding principal of QA&M Architecture, located here in Farmington.
Hi, I'm Angela Cahill. I'm a licensed architect and associate principal with QAM Architecture, and I would function as the project manager. I have 30 years of experience.
Hi, my name is Michael Lane. I'm an associate with QAM Architecture, and I would be the project architect. I've been with them for about 10 years.
My name is Erica Roberts. I'm a registered interior designer with QAM, and I've been with them for 9 years.
Good afternoon, good evening. I'm Mark Jeffco with OMG Industries. We're heading up the estimating services for our team. Some of you may know I'm also the project executive for the high school project. We mold these 2 projects together through this process, especially on the cost and estimating side. And just wanted to mention one of the things that I had done a pretty extensive renovation project with QA&M in the past. So it's a high school project, 3-year multi-phase project, and very successful.
I'm Greg Razzin, partner at Bull Run. I'm also involved with the high school project, but I'll be responsible as PM for all activities engineering-wise at Bull Run.
My name is Suzak. Anything that you want down, I'll try to put back up. I'm Raxi Coral. I'm an associate with Alpha Fashion Company.
Are you? It seems like it's.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask the participants to use the microphone if they're seated at the table? Because it's awfully hard to hear them. Thank you.
Okay. You heard Mr. Kleiman. Any future questions, just make sure you're right on the mics for him. Thank you.
Okay. Just brief history of my firm. Started, we were celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We're located here in Farmington. We've grown consistently over the last 20 years. We're now close to 40 people, 50% female, and we do a lot of different types of projects, but municipal and community centers is really one of our big specialties. So this project really kind of lines up very well with our project types. Angela, would you like to talk about some of our municipal projects?
So at QA&M, we have a lot of experience with municipal projects. We understand town departments, operations. all the adjacencies that go along with those. We also do a lot of community buildings and understand those needs as well. And along with that, we do a mix of styles. We have a very strong historic preservation group, and then we do a lot of contemporary work as well. So we have a mix of styles. I'm going to talk about 4 specific projects that are relevant to yours. The first is Bristol City Hall. That's a $20 million renovation project of sort of a difficult building, both aesthetically and layout wise and accessibility wise. It's sort of a brutalist style. What we're doing here is obviously giving it a facelift. We're completely renovating the interior to accommodate the departments in a much more efficient way. And we're adding an entrance lobby to allow for better accessibility, visibility, and a better entrance, a vertical lobby with elevator and stair. So the whole project will end up being more cohesive. And dealing with those interior demising walls has been very difficult. The next project is, oops, very sensitive. There we go. Newington, the Newington Town Hall, this is a $30 million project. And the most challenging thing about this project was the budget. This is a very large building that had both community and town spaces as well as Board of Ed. And to be able to fit everything in that they needed to do, completely renovate the size of the structure and have all of those spaces renovated was quite a challenge. We also had to completely redo the wayfinding of the building because it was very confusing. So adding a new entrance and making sure everything was really completely reorganized was the main goal there. And the next project that's relevant, very similar in style to yours, although this was not 1928, this is actually a 1950s building. So this is the Suffield Town Hall. We just finished this last year, came in under budget. This was a $5 million project. This was a very difficult construction, original of the building. Each floor plate was a different type of structure. And we had completely redo the MEPs. They had environmental concerns like mold and indoor air quality, as well as reconfiguring offices and bringing in additional offices to this building so they could offload a rented property that the town had been renting. Very successful project. Oops. And then lastly, I'll talk about Madison. So this is not yet built. We did concept drawings for the Madison Community Center. This is an old school building called the Academy Building. And we developed the concepts in order to successfully pass a referendum. And they were also awarded $4 million from the state to get the project going. So we're very proud of this solution. It's a very interesting building with a courtyard and multiple levels offset. So again, the solution was in the entrance, having an entrance that could communicate with all those different levels and provide a cohesive entrance and circulation to the building. And next, Mike will talk about some community buildings.
All right, so yeah, so I'm going to focus more on the community center side of things. This first project that we're showing you is the Newtown Community Center. This is a new facility. It's a combination of a community building, our community center, and a senior center, but it is separated into 2 different zones. There are 2 separate entrances for each, for both the community center and the senior center, but it is one large facility that allows for flexibility of both spaces to expand into one another, depending on the needs for each center at the time. The focus for this project was large community spaces, multi-purpose classrooms, and then also a pool facility. The community spaces are large open areas that can be subdivided down into classrooms, or they can be kept open for large events. The classrooms are actually multi-purpose spaces in the sense that they are also used as exercise facility spaces. This community center does not have a gym per se, so the classrooms are doubling as exercise rooms. And then finally, the finishes were a main focus on this. Wanted to keep everything bright and durable, but also look at the actual use of the spaces because multi-purpose rooms and community centers all have to do a lot of different uses. We need to make sure the materials are correctly utilized. The next is the Comstock Community Center. This is actually a conversion of an old school building into a new community center for the town of Wilton. The project included demolition of partial of the old school and then a gut and renovation of the rest of the school to convert into a community center. This had minimal addition work. Was mainly focused on a new main entrance and lobby space, and then it's just repurposing of the classroom spaces, redoing these classrooms into new learning spaces, new community spaces, and introducing demountable partitions in between the old classroom bays to be able to open up to create larger multi-purpose rooms as well. And then finally, we have the Branford Community House. This is a community center and senior center. This also was a conversion of an old school building into a community room or community house. This is separated by level for this building. So the senior center is actually on the top floor, which is accessible by grade on the north side of the building. And then the community house is on the first floor, which is accessible on the south side, as shown in the picture. This had some larger additions for new meeting spaces and then new entrances for both the community and the senior center sides. The rest was a conversion and update of the existing classrooms and gymnasiums. The classrooms were repurposed into new game rooms, new lounges, new cafes, and visitor spaces. A lot of these existing old schools are known for their kind of low ceilings and trouble getting the new HVAC into the new design. But I think we were pretty well accomplished in getting these new spaces into these tough locations and creating a great new building here.
Okay, I just wanted to, as we start to focus on this particular facility, I wanted to just sort of focus on my lengthy history with this building. This entire project basically started 10 years ago when we did an auditorium renovation study for the project. My partner Rusty and I both had children in the music program, and for Friends of Farmington Music, we did this auditorium study. It went as far as to get accepted into the Board of Ed budget. And then when the budget was presented to town council, everybody sort of said, wait a minute, what's going on here? Why are we putting money into this school? We've got to holistically look at it. But that project was what kind of kicked off this past decade to where we are now with the high school project itself. And then, as I think most of you know, when the project went forward to the current project, there was a unusual selection process and 2 architects were selected to study 3 options each, so that you had 6 options to choose from. And our firm was one of the firms that was selected for that. And so we developed 3 full options along with Tai-Soo Kim Partners. So we basically studied this building inside and out, gave numerous public presentations. So we, needless to say, definitely know this building pretty well. Craig?
So just to kind of add to Dave, yes, I was involved in that selection back in 2019. We spent many of hours going through the building and understanding, and days understanding what was in here. And basically within your building, that, you know, the vintage 20s, 30s, 50s, 60s, 70s, some of the stuff is still existing. It's original. Your boilers are actually not, they're 7 to 10 years old. They serve most of what you're looking to reprogram. They are steam. They convert steam to hot water, but still some of these buildings are utilizing steam, not as efficient as it could be. Not much of this is not air conditioned. Only the auditorium, the band area, and one level of the 1928 building is air conditioned. Everything else is this heating and ventilation type units, just to bring ventilation to the building. Air handlers are old, and which one? I'll just change. Not changing. There we go. Electrically, the gear is 60 years old. Most of this equipment is just outside the 1928 building. So depending on what options you're doing, is going to affect what we think about how we're going to proceed. Sorry. And plumbing, as I mentioned, plumbing is vintage from the time the buildings were built, and most of it's not usable for extended reuse.
Thank you, Craig. So as we exemplified, this team has looked at the building multiple times in terms of the existing conditions, but we looked at it in the context of a school, always a school. So if you choose to select us, we'll be sort of re-looking at it for different purposes, because that was never really part of what we were doing the analysis for. We'll be looking at it with a new lens for the town offices and community use. I'd like to talk also about the programming and space needs. So we've read the survey, very extensive, some very interesting comments, and definitely some great data. Obviously, we're curious to know what type of community involvement would happen between now and November, with November being the goal of presenting the options to the town council for their selection. So, you know, if you choose us, I think one of the first big topics at the kickoff meeting would be, you know, what's the right level of community involvement? We believe that, you know, community involvement leads to a successful referendum. So we would work with you to try to understand what you think the best forums are, you know, how often, is it electronic, is it in person? We've done all different kinds of ways of engaging the community and then working with you. And all of this would be to define the programmatic needs so that we could start to do space fitting. So the next step then is space fitting. Obviously, you've asked for two options. One is, you know, the standalone 1928 building. So we would do space fit for that to see what programs, what priorities of your programs could fit in the 1928. And the second option is larger than that, possibly as large as this on the screen, or maybe portions thereof. So option 2 might actually have some different permutations where we keep, you know, just one gym or a gym in an auditorium or et cetera. Again, using your programmatic needs that are defined by the building committee as directed, and then giving them priorities and fitting them in. The next step is more comprehensive. Once we've done some space fits that feel right, then we need to thoroughly flesh them out through the team. So that's why we brought the entire team here today, is so you understand how important that information is to us up front. We need to look at how that works from an entrance standpoint, the site planning. We need to look at it from an MEP perspective, as Craig mentioned, you know, where those electrical pieces are right outside the 1928 building. We also need to look at it from a structural perspective. Rich is going to talk about that soon. And then even from a cost estimating perspective, getting O&G's input on, you know, where the best places are to start and stop those projects once we've done the test fits. So that would then turn into hopefully our final option 1 and 2 that would then be presented to town council. So it's all about prioritizing and then synthesizing all that information. Okay. Great, Mike.
I'm going to briefly touch on the 2 different design options that we did start looking at for this interview. The first option, design option, obviously being just the focus of the 1928 building. As far as this project would go, the large focus would be on the north facade of the building. Obviously, with the demolition of the rest of the school, the north facade would need to be rebuilt. We believe that recreating this facade and rebuilding it as a new entrance is a great opportunity to provide a new entrance for the building, a new elevator for the building, and provide accessibility throughout the entire building in one central zone. We would also focus on exterior upgrades, historic preservation of anything we'd like to keep within the building, as far as potential upgrades as well as the exterior, such as windows. We'd, as Angela mentioned as well, we'd continue to work with the town to then reprogram what spaces we do have within the 1928 building. A lot of these classroom spaces can be repurposed into potential smaller offices, or they can be reused as classroom spaces, multi-purpose spaces. A lot of these old buildings still have larger structural spans, so there's potential to open up multiple classrooms to create larger community meeting spaces as well. The benefit of this option obviously also is that it has a much smaller footprint on the overall campus. With this smaller footprint, we are able to still potentially accommodate the softball fields as well as the tennis courts to keep the campus similar to the original design. For design option 2, we would be looking at keeping some of the existing larger assembly spaces as well as some of the offices and classrooms of the 1952 wing. A lot of these large assembly spaces are really ideal for community center uses and give you a lot of flexibility for different designs. One of the potential uses that we were looking at is for reuse of the existing auditorium space. You guys will obviously be receiving a new auditorium within the new high school. So there's potential reuse of that existing space into new different designs. A concept that we had here that we were talking about in-house was to infill the auditorium floor and to actually reuse that space as more as a sports center. Acoustically and space-wise, this would be great to accommodate large fitness areas, dance floors, and weight rooms as well. Community centers, similar to our previous designs, we typically see them being broken up and kind of segmented into different design options that are able to be enclosed and house separate utilities or separate spaces, different offices, but still allow for that flexibility to expand into one another if certain spaces need extra capacity. We'd again work with you guys to space plan all these different areas to make sure that we're keeping the correct areas of the building, making sure that we're utilizing everything that we're keeping and that it makes sense for the town to keep what we'd like to keep. Obviously, with this design option, you're looking at a much larger footprint. So this can have some trade-offs site-wise. You'd be looking at losing the softball fields within this campus. You'd be looking at potentially relocating the tennis courts. And then we would need to work with you guys to look at the combination capacity of the parking in general, if this is going to be a larger facility on the campus with the high school.
These are some of the options we would consider. As with option one, the 1928 building, all new utilities are going to be required since they are outside of 1928, which is fire protection, water, heating, air conditioning, however you're going to do it. So a couple of different ideas to make it simple, depending on what we do for program. VRF with DOAS unit is one potential option, or there may be a possibility of doing centralized VAV, but these are just the way we would think, depending on which program would drive us the right direction for the options. With option two, you have an opportunity to retain some of your services. Your fire protection system exists, so you'd be able to reuse that service and what's going through the building. Your heating plant, even though it's steam, there's an opportunity to retain it and still, since it converts to hot water, reuse that without putting in a new plant. So it's an opportunity to get money. Air conditioning, if you want to do a whole air conditioning whole building, that's a different story because we don't have a centralized approach. But going with centralized air handlers or whatever is going to allow for program, we have the opportunity to do it. And we can utilize what we have and then supplement with new to help maximize your money.
In terms of the structural systems, for option number one, where we're knocking down the remainder of the buildings and just saving the 1928 building, the only thing that we would have to consider is that we would have to possibly provide a new facade in terms of where the adjacent buildings used to be one next to each other. And we did something similar for the Hartford Insurance Group for a project called 140 Garden Street. It was the old Mass Mutual building that used to be a big conglomerate up on a hill in the center of Hartford. And the Hartford Group wanted to knock it down, but it had a significant historic value for the front end of the original building. So we knocked down the entire back portion of the buildings, and we added a new facade for that particular location. In terms of option number two, where we're actually saving some of the other adjacent structures that will remain, we get to pick and choose as to where we would demolish if we were going to reduce the footprint of the building, as to where we would reduce the footprint of the building. And ideally, we would sort of reduce it at the different additions that were added, periodically throughout the entire, I guess, life of the existing building. There's probably 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different additions, so that by delineating where we're going to take which addition off, we can reduce some square footage and reduce the areas that might not necessarily be required. And we would design a new support system for any kind of mechanical systems that would be necessary. In terms of the seismic upgrade, I don't think that we would have to do anything unless we go to a higher hazard risk category for seismic requirements. But seeing that it was initially a school and it's still maintaining a municipal function, it doesn't appear that we would have to do that. The only thing that we would probably have to do is investigate the floor loading capacities in terms of, the classrooms don't necessarily require a lobby type of loading or assembly loading. And an office space is more or less similar to a classroom space. But in terms of if some of the uses were going to be assembly uses, we'd have to sort of investigate some of those areas. But all in all, I think that, we could accommodate whatever decision is made so that if we had to reinforce the areas, we would, and if we don't, we wouldn't. And lastly, if we did have to infill, any kind of a sloped area for seating or any slope seating areas, there's a number of ways that we would do that. We could either do it with a structural system, a gravel infill system with a concrete slab, or even a foam fill system, which we have done before, and then to put a slab on top of that. So, I mean, we got a lot of different options as to how to proceed. It's just a matter of which option we're going to go with. Thank you.
Go on.
There you
All right. From a site perspective, we're kind of approaching either option kind of in the same methodology. One thing right off the bat we have to look at is, a parking study and how that layout's going to fit with the existing building and also the Farmington High School project itself. So we're going to have to be working kind of hand in hand with SLR and the other design team, to just kind of get their programming needs and also this programming needs for this project and kind of mesh them together to make sure that we're having one cohesive campus at the end of the day. So with option one, some of the benefits are it's a smaller footprint. So we're able to kind of push that into the site a little bit easier and still accommodate the tennis courts and the baseball field that's already there in the design phase. One thing that we will have to do in order to get enough parking around the building would maybe push the baseball field a little bit to the north, but we still should be able to accommodate that on the site with the 1928 building. Another thing that both options we're going to be looking at is getting a dedicated kind of entrance to this new facility. We want to make sure that it has its own prominent entrance and ability for travelers to not have to go into the high school's parking lot in order to get access to the site. So with option one, there's minimal impact to the actual high school property itself and the project on that end. Option two, again, we're going to be looking at the parking study and the layout itself. At this case, we're going to be having to utilize the east entrance for the most part, back to kind of what was used to be there back in I believe it was the 70s when this building was finally added onto. We will have to relocate the tennis courts. Our option right now is to move it a little bit further to the north where the baseball field is. That will provide circulation around the building and still provide those services. But we would eliminate the baseball field from this scope of work at this point. Like pass along to Eric.
Hi, so I'll touch briefly on the interiors. We have a few images listed as examples, but really wanted to touch on wayfinding is very important in the building, and we've achieved this successfully on past projects through signage. We've had some projects, for example, where they were on multiple floors and navigating the building was really a challenge, and we were able to really address that through colors, through finishes, and also, again, like I said, through signage. Another important aspect to touch on for the interiors is our FF&E capabilities. We have a dedicated interiors team to work on furniture packages, and we typically will meet with the various departments to really lay out the furniture to really what best suits them and also the design of the space. Thank you.
Good evening. One of the things that we've always talked to our clients about, especially at this stage in the pre-referendum phase, is that you really need to bring on a professional construction cost estimator and not have the architects do it themselves. And no offense, David, and your team. Our guys, we have roughly 15 people in our estimating department. That's all they do day and night is assessments. They are working, reviewing current market conditions, talking to trade contractors, constantly talking to material suppliers and vendors, and really getting the most up-to-date costs when we prepare these estimates. And again, some of the most critical things are your market conditions, lead times, all those are factored into the estimates that we'll be providing. One of the other, I think, unique situations here is that we have an active construction project now ongoing at the high school. We will be taking bids towards it's going out to bid mid-August, so probably mid-September, mid to late September. But I think it's important as we go and start preparing budget estimates here is to really marry those two projects together and find out what costs can be moved from the high school project to this project or vice versa. So we want to make sure that we're capturing those changes. If there's demolition work that is part of the high school project now, but may be removed because of this project, we want to identify those costs, and we actually have identified some of those as add alternates or deduct alternates in the current project. So I think that's one unique situation, having this team working kind of hand in hand with the high school team and making sure that those values are being presented correctly to the committees. Yeah, I'd like to turn it back over to David.
I just want to say also that we don't let contractors come up with design solutions either.
Fair enough.
But no, so one of the things I wanted to touch on, obviously, this project's got to go to referendum. We've shown you examples of several projects where we've successfully taken projects to referendum. It's part of our DNA. public presentations, community information sessions. You know, we've helped towns do websites. We've actually hosted websites for towns for their projects, you know, towns that weren't as sophisticated as Farmington and needed that help. So we, you know, it's definitely something that we're ready for. As a Farmington resident myself, you know, I'm fully prepared to, you know, attend, you know, soccer games at Tungus Mead, wherever it takes to go. So I just wanted you to know that we're committed to making this project successful for the entire community. So finally, I'm just going to sum up why we think we're the right fit for this project. As an architectural firm, this is the kind of projects that we specialize in. It's actually kind of a conglomeration of both of our primary specialties, the municipal, you know, town hall type projects, as long as with the community and recreation centers. So a lot of our projects, as I think you also know, are renovation projects. You know, we have just 20 years of experience in renovating these types of buildings. And then we're just very, very familiar with the actual facility that we're talking about here tonight. And I structured this team with people that have a familiarity with the Farmington High School campus, the facilities. I do think it's a very challenging project, and, you know, of merging it with your ongoing major new high school project. And I think that we are definitely the team that can work together with that team based on our familiarity and make sure that this project's a success for all of you sitting here, but most importantly for the community itself. So, you know, with that said, I think we're pretty much right on time. And so we'll go to our question and answer session.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I'll start the questioning. Please describe your understanding of the needs of the town of Farmington and the issues facing the 1928 building. What would you propose as solutions to address these issues?
Well, I would say as a primary goal is that there are spaces, you know, different departments. There's a little bit of scattering of departments around the town. And this is an opportunity to consolidate this into a more significant municipal center. This building is obviously would be a tremendously difficult building to ever add on to. And I think, you know, in years past, that's been studied and dismissed. So this is definitely an opportunity to, you know, accommodate a consolidation and a modernization of those functions. There are other unique functions in here, such as the probate court and how to deal with that, which is, you know, obviously just unique to this particular facility. That's something that we would want to study as to whether it stayed here or went up to the facility. You know, there's pluses and minuses to either approach. As far as the community center, the option 2, I think it's a tremendous opportunity, you know, for the town, in that, you know, despite the fact that we have the wonderful community center over by the police station, it's a very different kind of community center than what, you know, it's not a recreation center per se. And I do think, you know, this town is a very active town. We utilize our schools extensively for, you know, adult programs and things like that. This is a real opportunity for us to have spaces that are not dictated by school schedule, allows us to have, you know, men's basketball leagues or, you know, women's basketball leagues or any of those things taking place, you know, without worrying about the conflict with school-based programs. So.
Okay. Joe?
Yes. Again, thank you very much for your presentation. You guys started to talk about this, and I apologize to make you repeating some of the information, but describe your approach to completing the 2 conceptual designs for the 1928 building. What's your approach to providing high-level options to the town for future use on both 1920 as a standalone and retaining more of its existing facility?
Well, Angela, do you want to continue with that since you spoke about it during? the presentation?
Right, sure. So your schedule's a little bit aggressive depending on what, again, how much community involvement you want. But I think it's a good schedule to that target date of, November, December to be in front of town council with options really in great shape is where you want to be if you're looking for a spring referendum, because then you'll need that build up that time to educate the public. So our initial schedule would be that sort of phase one where we would do the programmatic analysis, community interaction, space fitting, and then vetting out the space fits with the entire team. That would all happen, from the time we get on board, all the way through October. And then we would prep those final two options, options 1 and 2 for town council presentation in November. Obviously, looking at feedback from town council, we would anticipate possibly revising those options accordingly for December meeting. And then, the overall goal is consensus. We want to make sure that, all the parties involved, that their thoughts have been heard and accounted for as much as possible, because getting 100% consensus on town council would then, hopefully lead to a successful referendum. Anytime you don't have consensus, it can be a little tricky. So and we like to make sure that all the thoughts have been taken care of. Nobody's coming at the last minute saying, why didn't you think of that? We want to think about every possible permutation and every possible program that can go into it. And beyond that, present the value of those things. So you saw a picture of we do many swimming pools in our community centers. So say, for example, there's a swimming pool idea, we would want to present that value to the community, to the building committee, to the community to understand, okay, well, if you want a swimming pool, this is what it's going to cost. This is what it's going to take to get it done. Likewise, with other programmatic elements that may or may not be priorities, the community is going to want to know those values. What does it take? How feasible is it to get that done so that they can vote accordingly? I think in the survey saw a lot of that, leaving cost aside, would you want this to happen? Would you want that to happen? Well, they're going to want to know how much would that cost? And then, yes, I would want that to happen. And then there's phase 2. Then after the town council, chooses a selection, then we run into, referendum preparation mode, which is really getting the word out and, exemplifying what we've done and making sure the community knows and has the knowledge in order to vote accordingly.
And taking the design far enough so that Mark and his team can really make sure that we're comfortable that what we're presenting to the town is a reasonable number and is going to get this project completed.
Right. Some of our communities actually sort of give us a threshold. If you have a gauge, and I think you did this with the high school survey, like how much would you be willing to spend? You don't want to go into a situation where you're going down a road that nobody's ever going to vote for, right? And that's where the priority thing comes in, is say, okay, well, we know what the top priorities of the programs are, and we just can't fit these other ones into what we think is a reasonable budget. So, it shouldn't be a secret. We should understand, through testing the waters, what kind of budgets we should be designing to. And I think, also, again, understanding from you, the building committee, who we should be talking to. Should we be talking to the library about their program so we're not double upping? Should we talk to arts groups? There's a whole gamut of different groups that we can work with to develop all possible programmatic items to make sure we haven't forgotten about anything. And then lastly would be the funding piece. You mentioned in the RFQ assistance and data and information in order to go into funding applications. We work with that all the time. Whether it's an ARPA application or some other grant funding application, whether it's state or federal, Eversource incentives, those are all things that need to be thought of at the beginning, because it'll affect what you think your cost to the town ultimately will be, and that's what the voters need to know.
Thank you.
Chris?
Okay, thank you, Peter. And thank you, Dan, everybody, for coming tonight. I appreciate the detailed examples you provided of previous projects where you're converting schools to office space. But for those specific projects that you went through earlier, can you describe some unique and specific challenges on those projects, and sort of how many change orders did you have to go through in your role in handling those?
Well, a lot of it on the existing, renovation type projects, the real key, and it helps both of those issues, is that as much as we can preserve of the existing layout and make the program work within the layout, it saves costs just from, a demolition and reconstruction point of view. But one of the biggest issues with change orders on renovation projects is what's behind that wall, right? And so, you know, a lot of architects will come in and just say, you know what, okay, I'm going to renovate this. Let's knock down all these walls and start over. And then you knock down those walls and there's plumbing stacks and there's electrical feeders and there's all kinds of crazy stuff in there that you never knew was there because, you know, it was never documented anywhere. So, you know, so in terms of, you know, we have a very good track record with budgets. We take the budgets very seriously. And a lot of the way we're successful with that, and you know, Mark could relay that about like Weathersfield High School, which was a massive project with a, you know, again, a very tight budget, is that we worked as much as we could with existing infrastructure. You know, let's lay this out. Let's be creative while saving as much of the existing facility as we can save. You know, let's put our bang for the buck, you know, with some design flourishes here or there. Erica and her team, you know, is very creative at just simply, you know, putting lipstick on a pig. Sorry for the description, but, you know, there's ways to do that that are very effective and make people feel like it's a new facility when we really haven't done a lot of destruction to get there. And that in itself, you know, drastically limits the unknowns and the change orders and the cost overruns, because any architect is going to tell you if you tear down a wall that's been there for 50 years, they don't know what's behind it, right? They don't even know how it's built usually, right? So that's a very important element of just our design approach to a renovation project.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, your time with that. As you know, this, and I think you mentioned, this is going to be a quick project to referendum. And I would like to know, we would like to know, have you described your firm's workload and the capacity of your firm to take on this project and maintain the timeline of a referendum for the spring of 2023?
And Mark, I'll be watching you
Excuse my
because you're
voice.
busy. You're busy on another project, so I want to know.
Well, we are not as busy as Mark is, so no, we're busy, but as
Watching
a,
it, we're
but as a, you know, as a good size, almost 40-person firm, we have, you know, pretty tremendous capacity. Mike himself is just finishing up Bristol Memorial Boulevard School, which was just a very extensive, you know, it's a magnet school, taking the old original Bristol High School, historic renovation and restoration project. Those students are, you know, getting ready to start school there this fall. So that frees up Mike. You know, we have other school projects ongoing, but, you know, with capacity, a lot of the other avenues of work that we do within the office are we are definitely seeing signs of a slowdown. So, you know, we definitely have the capacity to jump right on it. And the team, you know, and really, but for your perspective, the team that you're seeing here right now, we're the people that would be working on this right now, and we're committed to this project, and we would be jumping right on it, at least after my vacation.
Thank you.
Dan?
Dan, I think you're muted.
Thank you for accommodating my Zoom, and thank you for your presentation. We all understand the nature of today's economy, and there are price escalations and supply chain issues that we all experience. Could you describe your cost estimating process to ensure the project comes in on budget? And how do you reconcile if the cost estimates do not equal the bid amount?
Question for Mark.
I'll take it up. So there is a process that we go through. One, I guess, is the most important thing is that you're bringing the estimators on early. You're not getting through conceptual and starting schematic design without having a true estimate in front of you. So really the first thing that's being done on your particular project is being done the right way is having that estimator, you know, on board at the conceptual level and making sure that we level that estimate throughout that process. So as we're working with with Dave's team, they're bouncing questions off us. We're looking at steel frame buildings? Should we be looking at wood framed? What type of mechanical units are we looking at? And trying to select the right materials that's most cost effective for your project. That's kind of where it starts. And again, we work with these, with the entire team, making sure that we understand what's happening as the drawings are progressing, and that we're providing that input as far as costs go. Once we get through that first conceptual estimate, we check it against the overall project budget. And then we start to look at value management and seeing what items can be taken out of the project or looked at differently. Again, we looked at material selections and see if there's a different material that could be used for a lesser cost, but with the same quality and giving the project the same outcome. And again, we do that with each phase of the estimate. Now, in this particular case, we're doing two conceptual estimates based on each option. And then we're doing a schematic design estimate, which is not typical prior to going to referendum. So I think we're going to have a better set of documents to look at prior to going to referendum than we typically would have. Again, it's going to give us a higher degree of accuracy in the estimate. And we're going to go through that same process. So we're going to do some value management if needed. Probably at that time, we may develop a list of alternates that may be included as part of the referendum question. Again, trying to keep the overall project within that budget.
The other element that, and what we really like about working with Mark and his team is that because they're contractor construction managers as well, their cost and supply chain information is real time. It's based on what they were buying this week or last week. So many of the cost estimators that we and other architects work with, they're working off of, say a database or whatever, and they don't, it's updated quarterly or, things like that with escalation factors. Working with O&G and their team, we literally find out, guess what? You can't buy these storefront pieces in Connecticut now because they came from this plant and this plant is shut down for this purpose and the transportation costs are too high to bring them from Ohio. And we get that kind of a real feedback, and that's a wonderful aspect of having them on our team.
Thank you. Jack.
Oh, thanks, Dan. Thank you all. Good to see you all tonight. A couple questions. Dave, you went through a sort of a list of things you've done sort of to outreach to the community before the referendum. Are any of those things that you guys have thought have worked better than others, or something particularly successful? Whereas websites, meetings, soccer games.
Yeah, the soccer games are fun, but the website, it's hard to measure, but in this modern age, the websites are really key because people are not as engaged as they should be. We all have busy lives. We have soccer games and we have things like that. And so you really kind of wonder how the information comes out. And you look at this survey, and whatever, it was just under 1,000 people responded to the survey, but we've got 25,000, I realize that counts kids, but you realize that's a great turnout, right? And we probably have less people vote in some elections than turned out for this survey, but it's still not everybody in this town. Yet for something like this project, online information that somebody can check while they're supposed to be working, or they can look at their phone while they're at a stoplight, whatever. Those kinds of instances, people are like an information on the time, all the time, everywhere kind of mode. And I think it's really important in this community. There's a very educated community that if we can get the information out there, and again, it's got to be accurate, precise information. It can't be like playing tricks with the numbers or what's included and what's not included. But if you put the accurate information out in front of the people and you do that benefit analysis about what you're getting out of it, and that's the great thing about community centers. Schools are a challenge, right? Because there's all those of us whose kids have already graduated that say, well, why should I pay for a $140 million school? Like my kid is already gone. Community centers are exactly that, right? It's a community center. It benefits every one of us that live in this town. And that's a much easier sell because we all benefit from it. So go back to your, the crux of your question was, I do think that online information is really there, but this community is more engaged than most. And we're absolutely going to need to have, sessions, in the high school or in the current community center. I think would be a good spot because then people would understand that this is a community center, but it's not a recreation center, right? I think communicating the needs of the town hall is a little harder. I'll share with you already conversations I've had with neighbors and friends that there's a sense that we're looking for things to stick in this building because we have a building that we don't know what to do with. That's a perception that we're going to need to overcome. We're going to need to demonstrate that there's a real need for these departments and everything to be located there. So, I'd say that's sort of the biggest hurdle that we have to overcome. But definitely, that's what I would say and answer. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Kind of rambled on there. a
Yeah,
little
that's
bit.
okay. I just kind of want to know what,
Yeah.
what you guys think works.
Yeah.
Real quickly, do you think there's, you guys have done sort of historic
Absolutely.
preservation stuff.
Yep.
Have you ever worked with, and we don't know that it works here or not, tax credit?
Oh, yes, yeah. Yep. Yes. We've done, most of that has been on housing.
Yes.
I've done, low-income housing projects with historic preservation tax credits. I've done a number of those projects. So really grand YMCA down in New Haven that I completely renovated, slate roof, everything, replica steel windows, everything. Wonderful project for very low-income housing. So we've done that. About 6 years ago, we merged with Smith Edwards McCoy Architects. Kent McCoy is still an associate principal with our firm, and he is a historic expert, can handle, tax credit applications. As far as with SHPO, SHPO hired us to design their offices because we have that relationship with them. We're currently doing actually the governor's residence renovation, which was a state project that was handed to us because they just said, that's who we need for this project. So definitely have extensive historic experience and, as Angela mentioned, the funding side of that as well, but the tax credits and all of that.
So you would anticipate that it would be worth looking into for this.
It would be worth looking into, I think given the history of that project, I'm not sure that it qualifies like some of the other ones that we, that we work with from a historic point of view. It's been, sort of destructed and whatever. So I'm not sure what kind of credit we'd really get on that, but it's certainly something we could explore. And we have that expertise in-house.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Just one. Angela mentioned a $4 million comeback from the state on one of your projects.
Oh, Madison. Yeah, there was legislation. The Madison received $4 million for their community center that'll be coming up. It passed referendum first. And then, those local representatives went up to Hartford and lobbied for funding, and they did get $4 million. That wasn't a specific grant or anything. That was just
If it was part of just being a low number to begin with, they're just making up for it. Like, they're at 18%. Now we're gonna give them 24% or 26%.
I don't know how that number was negotiated.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we'll let you know.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate,
Thank you.
appreciate your time.
Enjoy the sunlight.
Yeah. Why don't we take another 5-minute break?
Oh.
Oh, I'll take. Oh, thank you. And you have your fee proposal as well? I do.
Did Q&M give it to you, Kat?
Yeah, they do. Nope, right off.
Devin, you got us off pause?
Yep, we're all set.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Okay, ready? All right, welcome everyone. Before we start, Kat and Kathy are going to explain the process a little bit, and then you can get into your presentation. Go ahead, Kat.
So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We have 30 minutes allocated for your presentation. We will be doing a timer, and I will try to give you a signal for a 2-minute warning. And then we have 15 minutes for Q&A, and we have some prepared questions. Each committee member will ask a question, so then you get to hear from all of us.
We have 3 firms that we're interviewing tonight. You're our last one that we are interviewing. After we interview with you, we're going to go into executive session. We're going to discuss the firms. Our intent is to come out of executive session and pick a finalist tonight.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, go ahead, sir.
We'll proceed. Okay, so we are Silver Petroselli and Associates. You've got our face pages, and ooh, this is a touchy controller. Essentially, you've got our face pages, and I'm Bill Silver. I'll be the principal in charge with Dave Stein, who is on another project right now this evening. So we had to kind of split and divide.
I'm Bob Banning, principal of Silver Petroselli and Associates and head of our engineering group.
Will Walter, professional engineer with Alfred Beneshy Company, sub-consultants to Silver Petroselli, doing site facility.
Dean Petroselli, project architect.
Amanda Cleveland, principal of the Interiors Department.
And let's go ahead.
Just one thing, when you're at the table, please speak into the mic, because we have one person on Zoom, one committee member.
Okay.
Thank you.
And to give you guys a sense, this is touchy. You hover your finger over it, it moves. So anyway, you see a little bit of our team, you know the structure of our group that we're bringing to it. If anything, the unique element is we've got Tom with Pan American Estimating that's going to be doing the estimating with our project. They were involved with the high school project on the initial conceptual phases, so they're very familiar at least with that estimating. And we chose not to go to trade contractors or contractors for estimating because right now they're busy, they're swamped with all their work. And so the quality of the estimating that you're getting in these next 2 months is really going to be compromised with trade contractors as opposed to it being an independent professional estimator that's obviously immersed in all of it. We're the only firm that you're interviewing that is architecture and engineering and interior design. So we bring nearly 95% of the services all in one firm. And so that's a list of the firm of our services that we do provide in-house with our team. And we really we have chosen to become an architecture and engineering firm. And there's only 3 of them in the state because most architectural firms are a little catty. They change engineering firms quite often based on either personal experiences or just availability. And so we've developed this team of 17 engineers on our team. So we have a steady and reliable and trusted relationship with these professionals that are always part of our priority and part of our team. So it's a unique that you have that in front of you. There are 47 of us based in Hamden, Connecticut, down the street. And we're already proud of our work in Farmington, which is this space that you're in. And some of you are nodding that you recognize it. It's quite a few years ago, but certainly work over at the middle school for the roof replacement and at the house, of course, with the renovations there. So a few projects in town that you've already experienced. Certainly the adaptive reuse experience is one of the reasons why you've shortlisted us are those projects that you can see on the wall. We're going to be going over 1 or 2 of them very briefly because you've already seen them and really spending more time a little bit talking about your project, but ones that are very parallel to yours are Hemingway Hall in Watertown, which you'll see is incredibly similar to your project, as well as converting Nathan Hale Middle School in East Haddam to municipal offices, and then you can see the rest of them. Many of these included alternative funding sources like historic tax credits that we were a part of. So that's not Farmington High School, that's Hemingway Hall. And you can see the similarity in it in terms of its elevation, its cupola tower, as well as the wings on it. And it was built 1 year different than what your high school was built. So it is of the same generation, similar construction. A lot of the things that we worked with at Hemingway for over 4.5 years are very parallel to what we have seen with you at the pre-bid through the high school building. It certainly had a complex site plan where we had to accommodate town recreation uses in those ball fields, which didn't exist before down below, as well as parking and public access. And this is their municipal center. They moved 4 disparate offices into this one municipal center, which was a former school. So it has some parallels to yours, except for moving the true town center into the building. It included these various uses, similar programming to what you have already begun with your recreation and community services group, is what we did over there as well. Very detailed programming as part of it. And then, if anything, importantly, we helped them through the referendum process. And it was approved on the first referendum in town. Fortunately, the town had been talking about it for years, but this gives you a sense of just some of the graphics that we will provide you as part of that referendum support. They're in trifolds, they're in brochures, obviously they're on internet, and we found one of the most effective tools in terms of communicating referendum goals was at Enfield High School. $103 million consolidation project of their 2 high schools was Facebook. The people, and especially the parents, really responded well to a very active Facebook site that the committee managed as part of the process, and we provided the tools that they needed. This is just an aerial of some of the improvements that were done at the school. That is now their town hall. I've got to make that correction. We modernized their interior details, but we preserved most of the structure, the structural bearing elements. You can see the wood floors are also part of the original construction in some of the areas, and obviously creating the new departments of tax and assessor and others, as well as the town meeting spaces, trying to inject natural light where it didn't currently exist in some of the more subterranean spaces, as well as staff break areas in that lower right-hand corner, and then more caucus rooms in that upper right-hand corner. So it just gives you a sense of the fit and finish that went into this old high school in Watertown. And certainly we created a new vault space that was required, meeting the state standards for their needs, as well as you can see some of the secondary spaces down on the left, which are their trophies and their display cases for a lot of the civic organizations that had nowhere to display before. And so we created those as part of the public spaces. Obviously, and Bob will talk a little about it more, we gutted their MEP systems, much like if we only preserve the 1928 building, we've got to move the mechanicals back into 1928 that only exist in 52 right now. Over at East Haddam, similar project in scale, a little different architecture. About 5 years later, this building was the old Nathan Hale Ray School, which they closed to create their new high school, and we converted it into their municipal center. So all their departments are located here. That gives you a sense of the layout. The gym is the slightly lilac colored space, even though it's got lines, that's the structure above, but it is a gymnasium that was preserved as part of the space. So it has a little parallels to yours in terms of adapting a different generation gymnasium that was added to the original old school and integrating it as part of it. The gray area to the right is part of the old Nathan Hale School that was demolished because it was structurally deficient. It didn't meet their town needs. And so we took that down as part of it, created the vaults, et cetera, for the assessor, et cetera. We generated our own detailed estimates for that project, but obviously on this one I mentioned we have Tom Harden of Pan American to do our estimating with us, but you can see the level of acuity or details that we get into, and Dean will show you some of the estimating comparisons left to right of what we estimated versus what was actually delivered. And this is the aerial of the site. It gives you a sense. Does this have a pointer on it as well?
That top button.
That top button. Okay, so it works. And essentially the town hall project was completed, but we helped them with their police services building. for maintenance, and then we help them do their planning for what's obviously is their skateboard park. So the site continued to grow as they morphed into more of a town center function. And again, whoops, I'm going backwards, giving you a sense of some of their spaces. These, for instance, we had to preserve some of the historic murals in the building where we work closely with SHPO, where SHPO reach really extends to the exterior facades of buildings, but we work with SHPO when there are delicate interior features to preserve. And this is right inside the assessor's office, which used to be the main entrance of the school. So you can see how it was creatively preserved and brightened up and restored, as well as some of the other features like the archways, et cetera. Classrooms becoming community meeting spaces. Unique spaces, obviously, the vault, there it is. This is not Hemingway's vault. This is another vault over there at East Haddam. And then last but not least, at Middletown Senior Center, we adapted that parochial school into their large 2-story senior center project. It is a 1930s building. This one we won, nearly half of the project was financed through historic tax credits that we got through Eversource. And so we had to help them with the application. Of course, it helped that it was already on the State Historic Preservation Registry. And so this town had the pleasant surprise as they broke ground to get half of it funded by those tax credits. Give you a sense, a little bit of the referendum graphics that went into it. And yes, it passed on the first referendum. This is some of the site work that was completed around that dark gray building in the middle, which is the former school. We had to put in enough parking for all of the seniors. We helped relocate their War Memorial Building, which was at the south end of the site. And then these are some of just the new spaces. And again, there's another mural, another historic mural that we had to preserve as part of the project, and looking for those historic elements, whether it's murals or in the left-hand picture, you can see the fireplace in the back. Those are actually historic. Those are tiles. Those are individually hand-painted and fired tiles that portray children's scenes. So this was either the library or kindergarten classroom as part of St. Sebastian's environment. And then it just gives you a little bit more of the spaces that were created. It wasn't municipal use in terms of probate judge like yours, it was senior center. And as part of that, we had to have food because food brings us all together. And so we created the new kitchen as part of the space, as well as all these new outdoor spaces. And as importantly, what we took is a 2-story building, a 1.5-story building that used to have an entrance. Here at this mid-level. We actually dropped the grade, took the soil out. So we lowered the entrance down to the main level, got rid of that split level entrance with a very small lobby, and created more conventional layout just by moving earth. So that's give you a sense of some of our creative solutions. I thought it was last but not least, but Killing Community Center is one of ours as well, which is over on the east side of the state, taking their former school and creating community center spaces. And then last but not least, this is some of the detailed estimating at a very conceptual level of what some of the costs related to that large community center were going to be. And some of the renderings, again, that you've asked for as part of our services that we create. So it gives you a sense of not only the color and scale, but the level of detail that we will be providing as part of the service. And we don't stop at 4 renderings. Once we have the models created, providing more renderings is just a natural outcome of the data file that we have. So an existing classroom would become spaces like this, new fitness centers. And with that, I've worn out, I've dried up, and it's
There we go. Okay, and that went fast. So my name is Amanda Cleveland. I'm head of the Interiors Department. I have the list of the services that our team does, but we work very collaborative with the architects and the engineers at Silver Petrocelli. The 2 pieces that I really want to point out in our list of services are the programming and the finishes. It's very important for us to, at the very beginning, understand what it is you're trying to achieve as you're bringing different buildings together into one. And then also, as we keep talking about the historic preservation, making sure that we are being respectful of that historic nature and also trying to update your facility at the same time. We do produce in-house furniture inventories. And so as, again, you have multiple facilities with furnishings within them, we will help you inventory those and determine whether or not those items are good to continue to be used or if they've met the end of their useful life. Why is that helpful? Well, as you're buying furniture, you need to know what your budget is. And we can tell you very early on in schematics whether or not you're buying 50% of your furniture, 90% or 100%. And that's really going to help you lock in on your costs. Some examples of adaptive reuse. We're currently doing the Swift Library up in Hartford. They are taking an old factory building and turning it into library and community space. So we're talking about the traditional library. It has an inclusive bank, but also those areas that help give back. So food bank as well as business incubator, all within the same space. Definitely under the eye of SHPO. And so they are very specific about making sure that some of those architectural elements, not just on the outside, but on the inside, are being reused. Another good example of adaptive reuse is the old Merrill Lynch building in New London. We're currently turning that into a business incubator as well as office space for the chamber. A lot of what we did is gone through and evaluate the building, tell them how are your mechanicals, what state are they in, what are the accessible upgrades that you have to do as part of that project so they could start to understand their cost. How we communicated that design to them. Their building is one of 100 red brick buildings in downtown. And they said, well, how can we stand out? And by simply offering to do a stain on the brick, now their one red brick building is a black building among red ones. And that's how they're truly going to catch the eye of drivers going by. And we communicate the inside by showing them some interior rendering. So as Bill said, we don't stop at one. We show you many different options of how you can achieve that goal. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Bob.
Thank you, Amanda. Again, Bob Banning, heading up our group of, as Bill said, that is judgy. 17 in-house mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection engineers. We do the MEP, we do communications, security designs. We've got our own in-house PV designer. That's our list of the crew. Certainly, we pride ourselves in being a hands-on group within the engineering team. So the first thing we would do would be to put a team of engineers into the building, crawl through the attic, open panels, look at wiring conditions, get a real feel for what the bones of the building is capable of. We want to have detailed discussions with the folks who have been maintaining the systems within that space so that we get an understanding of the history and problems that they've had. And then, especially as Bill mentioned, we need to look at the infrastructure. What exists in the space that's going to remain, or spaces that may remain, and what's going to need to be brought in, whether that's water, new power, new communications, sanitary connections. Those are big dollar items if they need to be recreated. So it's critical that that be coordinated early. We also need to talk about the spaces that those new systems would require so that we coordinate that with Dean's crew. And we think that all of that early in-depth engineering involvement is critical, especially to getting the estimate on track. A couple images of some of the buildings that Bill had spoken of, a couple award-winning LEED projects on there. LEED Gold, the first LEED Gold fire station in the state, also the first LEED Silver fire station in the state in Branford. Again, our crew in-house is LEED accredited. We have multiple LEED accredited officials, and we are in place to help garner any incentives or certifications that you may desire as part of the project, and we can help you get an idea of what the payback and what the initial increased cost might be to the project when those things are taken on. And with that, I'm going to slide it over to the team of Dean and Will.
Tag team at Will. They've warned me enough about the clickers.
So for the site considerations, things we'll be looking at, we'll be talking to the stakeholders. How much parking do you need? How much do you require by zoning, but how much do you require programmatically? It's going to be important to nail that down. We're going to be looking at efficient ingress, egress for the new building. Of course, with the parking, want to make sure we provide ADA compliance. And then one of the most important things is coordination of the site and the drives with the ongoing construction of the high school. And then finally, the utility analysis. There's existing utility laterals going to that building, but like Bob mentioned, what kind of shape are they in? Do they even go into that part of the building? And so we're looking at that and providing to make sure the utilities are going to be sufficient.
Again, Dean Petroselli. Amanda heads up the interior group. Bob heads up the engineering group. I head up the architectural group. So I think you've heard a lot about the adaptive reuse tonight already. And that's kind of how we see this project. what Bill failed to mention is we also have 2 historic architects on staff. You see and hear we do a lot of historic work, and we do a lot of adaptive reuse work. And the majority of our work is municipal work. About 95% of our annual work is municipal. And of that, the majority of it is existing buildings, not new. So our firm really specializes in these existing restoration projects. We love the historic side. We love the adaptive reuse. We've done a ton of town halls and municipal complexes. So this one is really right in our wheelhouse. In terms of the design considerations, obviously, I won't read the list, but we're looking at all of those bullet points in terms of understanding your wishes, understanding the community wishes. Bob talked about MEP. We surely look at the building from a code standpoint and analyze what its limitations are or capabilities are in terms of that. We're obviously always looking at alternatives and value engineering. We want to understand your budget from the get-go. Amanda talked about understanding the furniture. Bob talked about understanding the systems. We architects want to understand all of the components that need to go into this project. What condition is the roof in? What condition are the windows in? We need to understand that, the pieces and parts of the building, as we're also looking to inject the program that you folks are obviously interested in bringing into the facility. The last one is always important to us, honoring the history of the building. I think we showed some of those examples and the details that we go through to honor some of those components that are sensitive to us, should be sensitive to you, and are definitely sensitive to SHPO. And we obviously have to work as a team to make that happen. We always like to delve into the programming. We know that you folks have started. Amanda and I always work kind of hand in hand. The architects and the interiors in our firm like to drive the programming. That means interviewing staff, taking it down to the level that this committee wants us to go to in terms of how many we speak to. We often do surveys that we'll send out to staff if you would like us to approach it that way. In-person interviews are always best for us to understand. And once we understand what your programmatic objective is, we like to put that into a matrix. And really, before we start designing, this really is our roadmap of what you folks are expecting in the building in a written format. And then we're always comparing our designs to this written format. As you already heard tonight, we'll produce many conceptual designs, virtually unlimited until you're happy with where we are. And at each of those designs, we're also looking at the estimate. As we're estimating in-house between A and E and I, we're always analyzing what those costs are compared to that program that we're delivering. We're going to narrow down that concept, refine one, and then move ahead with that one in terms of producing the plans, producing the specs, producing the design narrative, the estimates, and any submission approvals that are required to take that through that schematic phase. Conceptual site planning. Between myself typically and Will's group, we'll be analyzing the site and how this building is going to work on site. If there's new parking, new configuration, new driveway, new ADA access, there's going to be a lot of components that are going to need to be analyzed. This happens to be one of our projects right now in New London, which is about a $35 million community center, brand new on a relatively large parcel of land. You're just seeing a image superimposed on that site. These are also New London images, again, giving the planning and zoning and the client some three-dimensional views of how this building is going to sit on site and the various parking components, and again, access drives and ADA handicap access. Again, once we produce these images in our computer, spitting out different viewpoints, analyzing color, analyzing daylighting, all of that is relatively easy to produce. These are some of the interior renderings for New London that we are currently designing. And again, this is currently in the design stage as we're wrapping up CDs due in about another 8 weeks. We are still fine-tuning the interior color palette and interior images with the architectural group alongside Amanda's group. Virtual reality, we do like to send out those QR codes to our client. You can actually just bring your iPhone up to that QR code and it would download the most recent renderings that we've produced. So we use the QR code as a way of transmitting our images to you folks and then eventually to the public. It's a really cool, high-tech way. People love the idea of just kind of on the go, being able to look at the images that our firm produced through their iPhone virtually wherever they are. We do have an integrated practice in the firm in terms of truly designing through the different disciplines. That's one of the benefits of being fully integrated with AE and I all under one roof. And obviously working on those models. We call our drawings now models because we don't draw two-dimensionally. We now draw in a three-dimensional world, and that model is simultaneously being worked on by multiple individuals. So if you can think of a Word file that you would be working on, if you can imagine 8 different people adding to that Word file all simultaneously, that's how we now work in the world of Revit versus two-dimensional AutoCAD. So the majority of our major renovations or new buildings, and this would be clearly a major renovation, would be done through three-dimensional modeling. We talked a lot about estimating. We are very adept at estimating in-house. All of our crew, all 48 of us, are accustomed to doing our own estimating. While we are planning on using Pack Group as a consultant on this project, we architects and engineers still like to do the estimating ourselves, especially at the early stage when there's not a lot of drawings and most of the knowledge is up here. The architect or engineer or interior who has all this knowledge is the same one doing the estimate. So we don't give it to a third party or even a second party within our own firm. It's the same architects and engineers and interior designers and civil engineers who are meeting you and hearing firsthand all the components that are going to be the same ones doing the estimate. And again, it's that continuity. We worked with a slew of construction managers. Maybe we failed to mention, this is our 32nd year in business at SPNA. And obviously, as you can imagine, about 200 to 250 projects a year we average. Do the math times 30, we have completed thousands of projects and have virtually worked with all of the construction managers throughout the state. Cost estimating. Bill had promised that I would show kind of a side-by-side. This is a good slide that shows the project on the left, what our estimate in the middle column is, and what the actual low responsible bidder came in at. And you can see that we take a lot of pride in looking at our estimates and understanding them. We do track every one of our projects that we have completed in our 32 years so that we continue to learn about what the cost per square footage and how well did we estimate it. And if we did miss one, why and where did we miss it so that we can learn on the next one. In this market, it's very complicated with the recent supply chain issues and COVID issues and escalation of materials to stay on top. We just bid 3 projects this past week, and we are very adept and we are very keen on what current numbers are. And again, we feel that's a huge advantage that we bring to the project. And with that, I'll bring it back to Bill.
I'll quickly close because I know time is short. We will develop a project schedule in Gantt format with you to project the time not only for this conceptual design, but getting you to that referendum level of detail, the schematic design by April. So we will spell it out pretty much with this kind of a graphic. Certainly the more referendum graphics, if you want us to provide support, we provide a lot of different formats. We have grant writers in our office that helped us obviously with the historic preservation grants or restoration grants, but also just writing referendum type graphics that are needed that are concise language. That's one, better English than what we architects usually use. And to give you a sense of community engagement, we don't limit the amount of times that we're up here supporting you at various events. So for instance, last week, Amanda was down in New London at their Bank Street or their State Street Festival, the Sail Fest. We had a tent there where we were showing the progress on the $30 million community center. So we're fully immersed in those, in the communities in which we work, and we do not limit our time on those. Those are successful referendums. Those are a partial list of some of them. And again, to emphasize what Dean's point is that we do mostly institutional and municipal projects. We don't do a lot of residential projects. Thank you. And so therefore, you'll see probably from our website that it is a lot of municipal and state projects. And so that's our specialty and why we choose to go after projects much like yours. And to close in that few seconds that I have remaining, obviously you've seen all of us are owners of the company. So you're getting the best that we have within this group so that everyone here is focused on your project. I've already mentioned almost all of the services are in-house. You do not have to worry about whether that firm worked with that engineering group this year, or was it 5 years ago, or was it 10 years ago? Obviously, that established engineering acuity with long-term engineers, some have been working with us for over 25 years, is part of the consistency that you need on this particular project. Certainly that large portfolio of municipal projects, and then last but not least, that record of referendum successes. And with that, hopefully I met your deadline, and we'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Now we're going to ask you a few questions. And I'm going to start it off. Can you please describe your understanding of the needs of the town of Farmington and the issues facing the 1928 building? What would you propose as solutions to address these issues?
You want to do a parallel with Watertown, preservation of the structure? Oh, okay. So essentially knowing your budget, the budget that we've seen in your correspondence, et cetera, we'd be looking to preserve as much of the structural character and history of the building that is there. Certainly understanding the condition of the exterior of the building and looking for durability in those finishes as you convert its use is one way that we will look to program it. Quite often in terms of our programming, we'll look for improvement in spaces like probate and the public access to those, and especially the independent and secure access that goes with probate compared to, let's say, some of the other lesser community recreation type spaces that don't get as much involvement or don't need as much security. And so it's truly trying to program spaces into the existing structure and the elements that you do have is part of our focus. And then certainly if more than 1928 is preserved, then that solves a lot of engineering problems. But if only 1928 is chosen as part of that first task, we have to put in the engineering systems in only that portion of the building that would remain under the first concept. And so that's going to be taking up a lot of the basement, infrastructure that's needed.
And that mechanical system, while Bob may be insulted, architecture is sexy and it's visual, and the MEP systems are meant to just provide the creature comfort. But keep in mind on projects like this, typically about 55 to 60% of your budget is going to be MEP and not architecture. So it's critical that we understand the infrastructure of the building, and that's going to have a huge impact on the budget depending on what the building needs. Architecturally, obviously we have to analyze windows and skin and masonry and roofs and all the interior components. The good news is because we've done so many of these conversions of schools to municipal, the double loaded corridors and the width of classrooms, the depth of those classrooms are very conducive to department sizes. So what we find is that we often can preserve the corridors. They are often load bearing walls down those corridors, but behind those walls, the size and dimensions of those classrooms, again, are usually appropriate for the programs of town hall. So that's typically the good news with those buildings. The bad news with them is that there often are load-bearing capabilities or limitations of what walls we can move if we wanted to move walls. And we have to be careful of that. So there's always challenges with any building, but we've done a lot of school to municipal renovations. So I think we understand what's ahead of us.
Thank you. Joe?
Thank you, sir. And thank you very much for coming. Describe your approach for completing the two conceptual designs for the 1928 building. What's your approach for providing high-level options to the town for future use on both the 1928 and as a standalone, and as retaining more of the existing facility?
Well, I think our approach is going to be, first of all, we're an extension of the town. We're part of the team. You're part of the team, and we need input from folks for this to be successful. We need to ask the right questions and develop that program and then start executing designs. So how are we going to approach it? We're going to, again, go through the building and understand the building's limitation. That's where we gather that information. That helps us understand the limitations and the challenges that are ahead of us. But more importantly, we need to hear from the district what programs are needed. And with that program list that I showed you, it really becomes the roadmap. Very quickly, we'll be able to determine if the building is X square feet and your program is Y square feet and Y is 2 times X, and the building's not going to be big enough. Sometimes it's that simple, but getting that program and that initial data and understanding how big it needs to be, what each department needs in terms of square footage, how much circulation we need, how much bathrooms and stairs we need, and running that math before we even start designing, it begins to be the process for us to come up with those schemes. So before we even start drawing, we're going to tell you, you can fit this in the 28 building, but you can't fit that. And if you want this and that, then we're likely going to have to look at some of the back buildings as other solutions. So that is the process. It's twofold. We have to gather data about the building, but we also have to gather data about your program. And then we marry those two together as we're looking at various design options.
Thank you.
Chris?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight, presenting. I really appreciate you sort of walking through your experience with the projects of converting schools to office space. But on those specific projects, can you give specific examples of certain challenges you faced, and how did you deal with change orders? How many change orders, the process, and how that all was handled?
I can't recall what the change orders on Hemingway were. I can tell you that we average less than 1% of unforeseen change orders, but we typically average around 4% on all of our projects of change orders throughout our 30 years. But the majority of those change orders are owner driven as opposed to unforeseen change orders that arise due to errors and omissions, if you will, on our part or on the engineering part. Often our clients will have some degree of contingency, or projects will come in under budget where change orders will be executed because they have additional dollars, as opposed to change orders being executed because the contractor found unforeseen. So each project is different, as you can imagine. The challenges in Watertown, I can recall one major challenge was we had very significant groundwater on the lower level. They were producing or putting in program on that lower level that never had program down there. They were very concerned about moisture and water infiltration that had plagued the building since the 1920s. And even though they knew that they had a water issue, they wanted to use the lower level of the building as program space. So that required us to do very extensive excavation to understand what the waterproofing is on the exterior walls. It also required Bob's group to put in significant dehumidification in the mechanical system to accommodate what we know was going to be a high moisture content down on that lower level. So a challenge that we overcame, but nonetheless, it was a challenge during the design of an old building. These old buildings were not intended to be used the way we're often using them. And therefore, we need to understand some of those complexities and understand how to solve them through the design process.
Thank you.
Jane?
Next. You mentioned our spring referendum target, and I'd like to ask about your firm's workload and the capacity of your firm to take on this project to maintain our timeline for a spring referendum, which is
Probably like giving Dean a break. We've got nearly 50 people. We're probably the largest firm that you're interviewing. And I would tend to say our workload, especially looking ahead at summer and fall with your programming and getting your conceptual done, you've actually almost got a little bit of a generous schedule to get you to that December deadline, that interim deadline. So our workload is average. It is not burdened. We are not heavy with overloaded. Otherwise, we wouldn't do this project. So we're comfortable with the schedule that you've stipulated. We've got this team plus support staff ready to work, with us hand in hand and doing the existing field conditions and observations. So that's very well, easily within our wheelhouse. Some of the projects that, to give you a sense, that have just come off the drawing board, in other words, that were bid, were $12 million and $16 million projects. And so that's probably provided quite a bit of relief for us. And that's why we have the room for our schedule on this one.
New London right now is consuming about 8 or so of our staff for that $32 million project. And those documents will be complete in approximately 6 to 8 weeks. So again, just some of our large projects are coming offline, which is going to free up. But again, with a staff of almost 50 plus Will's group, I don't want to scare you with this number, but we do anywhere from 150 to 200 projects a year. And we have a lot of horsepower to be able to do these projects because of our team and the size of our team. So we have no issue meeting your deadline. Actually, we were surprised, as Bill said, because it feels like lately everybody wants everything yesterday. And we're getting ridiculous requests to do what typically would take 3 to 4 months to do it in 3 to 4 weeks. And we're still able to accommodate some of our clients' requests or demands. But this schedule feels very comfortable to SBNA.
Thank you. And on the site side at Benish and Glastonbury, we have about 25 to 30 professionals, surveyors, landscape architects, traffic engineers, civil engineers. So similar to Silver, a lot of horsepower. We're a high volume firm. So no issues here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dan?
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for accommodating me in my Zoom here. I think we all know from our own personal experience as well as your business experience that in today's economy, we are experiencing price escalation and supply chain issues. Can you describe your cost estimating process to ensure that the project comes in on budget? And how do you reconcile if the cost estimate does not equal the bid amount?
Sure is a tough word. And how do any of us ensure what's happening in the market right now? To give you a sense, we just finished the bids for the new North Branford Police Department last week. There we saw an escalation in expense from the first bid in summer of 2021 to now the second rebid after value engineering the project, and the prices went up 20%. Now, that probably doesn't sound like a lot, given some of the horror stories you've been hearing on supply chain. And what we do is a combination to how do we ensure? Oh, gosh. Essentially, it is with our own in-house estimating, our knowledge of contemporary cost per square foot during the conceptual phase, we start challenging you and your program team with giving you a sense of how we're doing with the budget early during the conceptual phase. To the degree that we're going to ask, we think we're over budget by about 15%. Are there some program areas you could do less or less with? And so we'll always, with virtually every design solution, because you're meeting every 2 weeks, we're usually bringing our in-house estimating with us on that to give you a sense. That still doesn't ensure, because the economy is so volatile right now. And so we do our best then with that secondary estimating of PAC Group and their professional team to double check our work, which we reconcile with as well as reconciling with you. It's kind of a triple level of estimating acuity, and probably most importantly is active estimating on projects of your size that gives us the comfort of what are the going rates for boiler systems for 30,000 square foot aged buildings, things like that. Those are some of the things that we use as tools to elevate our estimating acuity.
Thank you.
Jack?
again, thank you all for being here. I was interested to hear some of the nice things you do to interact with people to put it out before referendum. And the publicity and the websites and actual being there, which I was kind of, I liked. If you want to talk a little bit more about some of the more interesting ones you've done lately and their success, that would be great.
So a lot of what our interiors group has done, we've teamed up with Margaret Sullivan Studios for the Swift Library. And so we actually had social events at the library. We invited the community to come in. We have invited speakers who will give a lecture about something very region specific, and then do breakout sessions where we'll then sit down and ask, what do you want to see in your building? And we'll get physical. We'll put plans up on the board, we'll write things down, we'll put Post-it notes and start to evaluate that. In New London, we actually had an online survey so that as people were sitting there, they could either hand in a physical questionnaire if they wanted to, or if they were tech savvy, they could sit there on their phone and they could answer those survey results. And it updates real time. So as we're giving the presentation, we're also seeing the questions that people are having to be able to help us pivot to topics that interest them. Sailfest, we were sitting out there in the 95-degree weather, promoting the project just to anybody who was interested to come by, even if you weren't a resident, just to see what it is we're doing and ask questions about it. Getting to know our local constituents because we're designing for you. What else have we done? Numerous, so there's our referendum right there where the New London project was a very controversial project because of the parcel that it was sitting on. And a lot of the residents are not supportive of that project, or at least the ones who are vocal or not. But going there and telling them from early schematic design and then coming back during design development, and we'll be going back again during construction documents to tell them, here's the steps that we've taken, here's the feedback that we've heard and how we're implementing it.
New London is the eminent domain site where 72 homes were taken over by the town, and we were selected as the architect to put up a new community center. What could go wrong, right? So yeah, it was a very touchy subject with surely a lot of opinion from the public. So from the get-go, they needed a lot of interaction, and it worked great with SB&A because we love that public interaction. So you saw just a few, but we've done dozens of presentations and community interactive presentations to get them on board and to make sure that there's a forum where they can ask questions. So as Amanda said, we sent out digital questions through the web if they care to take a survey that way. We had physical answer Q&A sessions in person. They can write in, social media was used. So we're using really all the technology that's available and throwing it back to the public so that they're comfortable asking the question. At the end of the day, that was really the goal of New London and the goal of most of our clients. So I think we've done it all from local access TV in Enfield that I was on. They had a weekly broadcast in New Milford right now. We're doing weekly broadcasts for a project, just getting data and news out to the public. So a lot of different formats, if you will, of how to get the information out and back, and whatever it takes, that's what we're going to do.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you very much for your presentation. And we will go into executive session if you want to call the town manager's office tomorrow morning and find out the results. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in.
And this was a
Kevin?
nice technology setup.
Yeah.
Usually we're fumbling with projectors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go into executive session.
Motion.
And if someone could read the,
Yes, I'll make the motion. Executive session, review and discussion of the RFP response for architectural design and related engineering services for schematic design and preparation of a cost, excuse me, of a construction cost estimate for renovations for 1928 building. To adjourn the meeting to executive session as permitted by Connecticut General Statutes 1-200 subsection 6 and 1-210 section B subsection 24. Responses to any request. That's
You don't have to
don't
do
you
that.
have to do that?
No.
And there you go.
Oh, and then just put who the
The attendance
attendance.
of the executive session should be limited to the voting and non-voting members of the 1928 Building Committee.
Second,
Second.
any discussion?
Just a quick housekeeping. We are keeping the Zoom stream going because there are some motions after. So we will go back into the public session after this.
So explain that to me.
Yeah.
So what will happen is executives, this Zoom that people are currently on will be muted and a break sign will be up. Once we are done here, we will take that mute and the sign and the Zoom will continue. We just don't want to lose people in case they want to see the
Okay.
the motions after. We do have a separate for Dan that's online, a separate executive session link for you to join on Zoom so you can participate in that discussion.
Okay, so Devin, at this point in time, you're going to put a screen up so people can't see us or hear us.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Really?
Correct. Yep, it'll say.
It'll just have.
You all set?
All set.
Yeah.
Dan is on. I just have to promote him. Dan, I think you just have to accept the promotion to panelist. All right, now we're all set.
You all set? You there, Dan?
Oh,
Here I am.
Okay. You got one thing to do, Kathy?
nope, I was just going to get ready to open the door.
Yep. Okay. All right. We are now out of executive session at 8:54. Okay. At this time, we are going to table line items G2 and 3, and I will need a motion for that, please.
Yes, sir. I'd like to make a motion to table item G2.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 I need a motion to table line item G3.
I will make the motion to table item G3.
I'll second it.
Okay, any discussion on that? I'll just say one thing, that the reason we are going to table line items 2 and 3 is we still need to calculate the bids for the proposal, and staff needs more time to do that. And that will lead into our next motion to schedule a new meeting. So if I could have a motion for another meeting for July 29th at 9 a.m. on Friday, July 29th.
Did we vote on tabling?
Oh.
I don't know if we did or not.
Oh, hold on. No, we didn't.
Yeah.
So we got to vote on
Tabling
G3.
Yeah.
Go ahead. All those in favor, say by saying aye.
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 All right. So now I need a motion to
I'll do that, sir.
do the new meeting.
I make a motion to set the next meeting for Friday, July 29th at 9 a.m.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. On that note, then we're going to skip down to G4 to discuss the August 9th, 2022 meeting.
I just wanted to kind of go quickly, and again, when we hire our architect, there'll be, obviously, this is at a high level, but just what our thoughts were that on the next meeting, which is August 9th, which is 2 weeks away, is that we figured that the new architect would come in, we'd have introductions, have a kickoff. We'd talk to them that we would be giving them all our data that we've collected about the space needs from the staff. I've been meeting with all the department heads, with the probate judge, like we talked about at the last meeting. We figure we could give them some of that information. Also,
my hope would be is that you guys would direct the architect to meet with me, and I could go over it in more detail with them, and then they could start meeting with the departments and start creating the space needs, the details, which they talked about in their proposals. And then I think maybe I just put kind of provide clarity regarding the 1928 proper versus the 1928 option. I think that just kind of going over the charge, what the council's looking for, what our timeline is on some of that, high level. And then really talk to the architect about discussing the timeline that we are looking to meet with the council and get this project to referendum by May, and that they need to start creating a time frame for us to do that. Then I don't think we need the August 23rd meeting if the architect suggests that we do. The reason why is because I think at that point, the architect's going to be meeting with department heads and getting space. They're not going to be able to do anything until they know what the space needs are. They're not going to be able to start really designing. So I think we should be able to cancel that August 23rd meeting. Now we're on the September 6th meeting, which is 2 weeks after. One of the things that we wanted to do was that the staff and the architect, and if you wanted a little subcommittee, that would be fine with us too, would be to review the community newsletter. We felt at this point in the beginning of September, everyone's back from vacation. We'd have the architect on board. We'd have the timeline by then, and we'd send a community newsletter out to the public saying, this is where we are. Go to all the homes.
Okay.
That would be, we'd aim for that in September. Now the architect's designing, meeting with us, we're doing the regular schedule. The next milestone I had was November. In November, we thought kind of into November, but before Thanksgiving, we thought we'd hold a community meeting showing different conceptual options and gather input from the community at that time, because we'd have pretty good schematics, right? By then. Conceptuals, I'm sorry, conceptuals. So we thought by like mid-November, before Thanksgiving, we'd have a community meeting showing what the thoughts are, what's going in the buildings. We'll know by then the two options, which would bring us into December. The December council meeting's early, so people won't be on Christmas yet. And we have the recommendation and the presentation to the council in December. If we've left ourselves a little leeway, that if the council's not ready to pick that option or has more questions, we do it in the first January meeting, or if we get delayed a little bit, we can do it in the we've given ourselves saying the first January meeting, we could do it at the council level. And at that time, we think at the first of the year, once the council picks the option, then we do another newsletter, and then another newsletter goes out. And then from January into May, it's design, and sell the project. And that's get us to May. So that's kind of high level where we think we're going.
And our
Okay.
schedule ends December, and then we'll talk about.
Yeah.
On the 9th, I'm only going to be able to be here for a half hour. because
Okay.
reception for
Sure.
Caleb
Okay.
saying
Okay.
Honored to act.
Okay.
as what we-
Yep.
Excellent.
It just popped up.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem.
No problem, no problem.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we
Anything?
definitely canceling the 23rd?
That's the next agenda. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So we're all set with that one?
Yep.
All right. So I need a motion for G5 to cancel the August 23rd meeting.
Motion.
Second.
So move. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, passes. All right,
Did we do that?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
okay.
I think
Ready
that's
for
it.
adjournment?
I think
All
that's
right, I
it.
need a motion for adjournment.
Motion.
moved.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, maybe it's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.